welcome. Good evening, good afternoon, whatever time of day it is for you. Hello. It's good to see you. Feel free to say hello if you're just joining in. This is week 5. That's right, week 5. I'm your host, Dr. Sheldon L. Eakins, host of the Leading Equity Podcast, host of The Art of Advocacy, and I'm excited for today's topic. We're talking all about teacher and student relationships and what that bond looks like and how important that bond is. Feel free to say hello, where you're watching from, all that jazz. Appreciate your support. Thank you so much for joining in today. I'm gonna bring up my slides because I like to get started. I'm that kind of brother, so I like to get started, and so we'll get into the slides in just a moment. So here we go. Teacher plus student equals BFFs. Unleashing the power of the ultimate duo for social emotional awesomeness. Oh, good to see you, brother Kafele. Good to see you there. Thanks for joining in today. All right. So the thing about it is when we think about teacher-student relationships, this is so important. Now, if you were with me last week, you heard me talk about the attachment. I'm going to review very quickly about the attachment. But before we get into that, of course, we got to give a shout out to the book. If you haven't purchased the book, Leading Equity, Becoming an Advocate for All Students, that is out. If you have purchased the book, make sure that you write me a review on Amazon. I appreciate that supports your brother. So I appreciate that as well. As always, you can feel free to drop in if you got any topics that you would like to see down the road. I am in the process of writing my second book, but if you do have some topics that you want to have discussed in regards to sense of belonging, put that in the chat or shoot me an email, sheldon@leadingequitycenter.com. As always, this is a brave space. That means I'm going to say some stuff you may or may not agree with. And I think that's totally fine. I'm one of those kind of brothers that's it's like, listen, these are my thoughts. Sometimes I'm going to bring some research to you as well, but it's totally fine with me if you totally disagree. I mean, that's how discourse works. And I'm going to bring some of my opinions, some of my own anecdotal stuff. And then, of course, I'm going to bring some research as well, but feel free. I will not jump on you. I'm not the kind of dude. So feel free to share what your thoughts are. All right, let's get into today's agenda. We're talking about positive and meaningful connections, and then we'll move into the teacher-student bond. The teacher-student bond. And I want to bring this quote up because I think this is really important. I was just watching, I watched that Rita Pearson TED Talk, I don't know, at least a million times, it seems like at this point. And I actually was showing it to my students today in my class that I teach at on campus here locally at ISU. And this quote came up again. No significant learning can occur without a significant relationship. I'm going to say that one more time. No significant learning can occur without a significant relationship. That was back in 1995. Somebody might say, oh, well, that's research is past 10 years. Do we think that post-COVID, that rule doesn't apply to this day? Because I would imagine that it sure does to me. As long as I've been teaching, as long as I've been in a classroom, and even as a school principal, that's one thing I will stand by. Is when it comes to relationships, when it comes to not just relationship with your students, but also the relationship with your community, their parents, guardians, things like that. That is so vital, so essential. And I hate that it sounds cliche around these days, right? People talk about relationships. And it starts to get almost like as if you hear it so much that it's almost like, okay, yeah, we know. Yeah, relationship, blah, blah, blah. No, but it's really important. Like, so which makes me want to bring up our formula, right? The formula when it comes to a sense of belonging, okay? If you want to foster, to create, and I say this every week, you have to have these 3 things. A student has to feel accepted, included, and supported. If they got one or the other, if they got 2 out of 3, it doesn't matter. They need to have all 3 of these things in order to feel a strong sense of belonging. Bottom line. Argue with me. I want someone to tell me that it's not true. And I love to we can have that conversation. But that is the formula. They have to feel accepted and included and supported. So everything that we talk about every week, week 5, everything that we talk about is going to support that formula. Okay? All right, let's jump into positive and meaningful connections. Now, last week we talked about John Bowlby's work when it comes to the attachment theory. Um, his research back in the 1950s came up with basically, you got the proximity maintenance, the safe haven, secure base, and separation distress. Now, when we're thinking about from an early childhood standpoint, from our young babies, right? They identify with their caregivers. And that connection with their caregivers and how that impacts them as a result of their adulthood. Okay. All children have a desire to be near the people that they're attached to. We talked about the desire to return to that attachment figure for comfort and safety in the face of a fear or threat. As I mentioned last week, school is sometimes the safe haven for our students. That is the safest place for them. Outside of that, now I've talked about how there's situations where students maybe they carry a knife in their backpack, for example, and they're afraid to get caught with that backpack. Now they're not bringing that weapon to school because they're wanting to do harm to another student, classmate, or any of those kind of things, but they're essentially just wanting to make sure that they're safe on the way to school and on the way home, because that's maybe the type of neighborhood that they're in, right? And that's some of the things they had to deal with, right? Maybe their caregiver is not around or able to walk them to school. So those kind of things are important. They got to have that secure base, meaning your school, for example, or the home could be those secure bases. Okay. And then there's that separation distress, the anxiety that occurs in the absence of the attached figure. Now, we built upon that work, right? So one of Dr. Bowlby's students was Dr. Mary Ainsworth. And we talked about the secure, the anxious avoidant, the anxious ambivalent, and the disorganized. Now, the secure attachment is the most common attachment, but there, of course, we're thinking about it from an equitable standpoint. You know what? All kids aren't the same. Traumatic events and experiences can impact the way a child's attachment occurs. And as a result, you might get different forms, right? Now, ideally, yes, we do want our students to have the secure attachment. And then on the extreme other side, if you will, is the disorganized, right? Again, a lot of that comes from their attachment to the caregiver. So, why does this have to do with education? Well, I'm glad you asked that question. Thank you for paying attention and thanks for asking that question, because here's the thing. Teachers who spend more time with children face to face than anyone else often become the most significant individuals in their students' lives. They provide a vital source of security and stability, especially for students who are already carrying the weight of feeling rejected. Okay? Now, the thing about students, and I talk about biases because I believe, like, when it comes to being a teacher, right, and you're wanting to be the best teacher that you can be, we have to start with our own self-awareness. We have to do that work and say, you know what? As much as I hate to say this, because you'll hear that comment, oh, I treat all my students the same. As much as we want to say, we don't want to say it sometimes. We have our favorites. We got the kids that are our favorites, for whatever reason. Maybe we have a good relationship with them. Maybe they're straight A students. Maybe they're funny to make us laugh. Maybe we have a connection in which, as students to teacher ratios, we there's interest. Maybe we watch the same movies, music, things like that. Okay, so we spend a lot of time with our students from that K-12, pre-K to 12. Our kids with us 7-8 hours a day. And so over time, those relationships have to develop. Okay. So we're supposed to provide a source of security, stability, especially for students who already carry the weight of feeling rejected. Now, as a result, here's the thing: when we assess the biases, there's a halo bias and then there's a horns bias, for example. Right now, the halo bias, that is the bias in which, you think about the most popular students. Maybe it's via charismatic uh, attributes. Maybe again, great in academics. Maybe they're really good in sports. Whatever it is, it's almost as if those students can walk on water. Right? They have that halo, but arguably, I wouldn't even say arguably, what happens when we pay all this attention to those certain students that are, again, quote unquote popular students, and we don't pay attention to the students who need the most support? But we're spending all our time writing glowing and just these recommendations for college, and we're inviting the scouts out to watch their games. But there's some students that aren't getting the love, support that they need. They're damn near invisible. So when we're talking about, again, going back to the formula, accepted, supported, and included, what happens to those students that aren't considered the halo bias within that halo bias is the horns. So although I have this quote here, it talks about the importance of our students. What happens? There's a caveat. Because there's so many school norms, right? So all the students that follow within the school policies, the spoken rules and the spoken rules, all those different things. There's many students that don't fit within that line. They're outside of the coloring when when you talk about, you have your coloring books, and they're outside of those lines, right? And as a result, they may reject those connections, they may reject those bonds, and they might act out. And there's typically a story behind this. But and I'm going to talk to our teachers for a second. But as teachers, let's say we have a classroom, we have our classroom management, we got our protocols. This is how you come in class. These are the strategies that we need to do. This is what needs to happen. And we have students that, for some reason, they're not fitting within that. Frustration starts to build. We're trying to figure out, well, why can't I get the student to respond or behave or act the way I need them to act? Why can't they be like the other students? And so what happens is teachers may respond in a few ways. Okay. Some of those ways that they might respond might be the teacher feels the need to win every battle and engages in a power struggle with the student. You didn't sit down, or you didn't sharpen your pencil at the right time. You didn't do this, you didn't do that. So there's this battle. This student's being disrespectful. Now, again, sometimes there's more to the story. But this can happen. Another thing that can happen is the teacher feels like they need to save face by having the last word. Again, control. This is not necessarily a classroom in which there's there's I am the adult. This is a classroom where I'm the adult. I'm in charge. Whatever I say goes. Okay. So as a result, feel like you have to have this last word. Fortunately, sometimes what happens is the teacher talks down to the student. Teacher confronts the student with frequent use of the question, why? Why do you have to act like this? Why aren't you doing what I'm asking you to do? Okay. And then sometimes the teacher preaches, moralizes, and threatens the students. Seen this a lot. If you don't sit down, if you don't be quiet, I'm going to do this. I remember when I was a little kid, when I was in elementary school, I remember those days where I had teachers. No, I'm not. Okay, I'll be honest. I wasn't I wasn't a stellar student when it came to behavior. I definitely had my days, right? But you know what I used to hate? I used to hate those times when teacher, like, one kid does one thing, or let's say a teacher's at the threshold. It's like they're right at that line. It's like someone else says something, and whole class gets punished because of the result of one student. And like when you're in the classroom and you're one of the other students that didn't do anything, right? I was just chilling. I was actually paying attention this time. And then what happens when that one student does something and then the teacher punishes the entire class? Oh, no recess for y'all because and Johnny said something, right? And I've done it too. I'm not gonna lie. My early teaching days, I've done this, right? Because that's how I came up. So I figured that's what you do, right? In order to get that order in your classroom, punish the entire class because of one student, or because again, you were at that place, you were at that limit, you were at that stress, that's, I guess I would say, stress level threshold. You were right there, and you just needed one more thing to happen, and as a result, everybody gets punished. Now, obviously, that's not fair to the entire class. I think there's other things that we can do, because naturally, the peers are mad at the student, right? And so now students got to deal with all that, with the backlash, not from just the teacher, but also the kids are mad because they didn't go to recess. Now they're mad at Johnny as well. Right. So that is not the best protocol. Now, what we should be doing instead is provide that continuous acts of love and kindness. Again, thinking about our Halo students, those are the students that get the most, we love them. We tend to love the Halo students, but the Horn students are the ones who are often labeled as troublemakers. These are the problem children. These are students that are constantly being suspended, expelled, and all these different things, right? But instead, for all of our students, each and every one of our students needs to have continuous acts of love and kindness. And I'm saying this as an individual who has made his mistakes as well. Okay, and I can't come to you and say like this as if I'm perfect myself, and as if I've never made any mistakes. I have played favorites, right? I have, right? And so this is a message to my own self. This is a reminder to me as well. I remember as a kid, I used to love, my parents used to read me bedtime stories. And there was this one story, books, Uncle Arthur's Bedtime Stories was a book that I used to love reading. And there was all these different stories, and, always morals of the story type of books. And there's one that really sticks out to me as I'm thinking is there was one that's like you had to heat hot coals on their heads. The story goes, the boy comes home, he tells his dad, Daddy, there's this bully at school. He's giving me a hard time and he's just mistreats me. He's constantly, when next time I see him, I want to beat him up. I'm going to do this. I'm going to do that to him. Dad says, well, how about this? Why don't you put some hot coals on his head? So the boy is excited. Oh yeah, hey, shoot, Daddy, I wasn't expecting that out of you for sure. Yeah, you darn right. Let's do that. How do I put hot coals on his head? Because I don't know. I might get in trouble. I mean, I like the idea, but I like where you're going, like where you're thinking. That might be a little bit too harsh. Dad says, this is what you do. I want you to be extra nice to this young kid. So, see, the kid is going to think that you're going to give him a hard time. The kid thinks that you're going to sit there and he's going to be mean to you and you're going to be mean back and you're going to go back and forth. But no, he's going to be mean to you. But the way you put those hot coals on his head is by being extra nice to him. Share your Doritos with him. Ask him if he wants a soda from the machine. Just be nice to him. Hey, we're about to play a baseball game. We're about to play dodgeball. You want to come play with it? Why don't you come be on my team? Be extra nice. Now the boy is skeptical because again, he's mad, totally upset with this whole situation. He's not liking school. He's feeling like he's being bullied, and the boy is upset. Dad said, "Trust me, just try it. See what happens." So the boy goes to school the next day, does everything his dad said. Extra nice to the boy. I mean, the kid is just going hard. And he's like, the first time the boy's nice back to him, the kid's already caught off guard, like, whoa, what's happening here? So now he's trying to go a little harder. I'm gonna be really mean to this dude. Maybe he pushed him a little bit. Maybe slammed a door in his face. Boy says something nice to him, still does kind gestures. By the end of the day, they're down there best friends. So the boy comes home, tells his dad all about his day. Look, we're buddies now. Dad is excited because not only did the son take his advice, but it worked because the son learned a valuable lesson about heating hot coals on people's heads. And what does it have to do with school? From a teacher standpoint, we might have a child or student that challenges us. And they, kids would like to test us and see how far they can push things, push the limits. Could this be an opportunity for us to get into our take a deep breath? All right, Johnny, I see what you're doing. How about you I need some help with passing out these papers. Can you help me pass out these papers, Johnny? Or hey, Johnny, I need some support with this work. Do you mind running down to the office for me and just handing this message over to the principal? Or can you do this for me? Being extra nice to those children, because there's often a story behind this, right? There's often, a lot of times when students are quote unquote acting out, there's a reason. They want some attention. Give them that attention in a positive way. See what happens. Okay. Another strategy that we can do is let me bring up my slides here so you can see here. What's interesting today, or actually this week. So I've been teaching a class at the university here at Idaho State. I live in Idaho. Every time I say I laugh. Anyway, I'm teaching this class. It's intro to, it's first year. These are kids fresh out of high school. It's a great group of kids that I'm working with. But the class is families, communities, and culture. That's what the class is about. And this week we were talking about the teacher. Actually, it's funny because the topic matches up with tonight, right? So the conversation was all about the value of our teachers, and I had the students reflect on their teachers back in their K-12 experiences. And here's the question that I asked them. I said, go into detail about what your ideal teacher would be like, what they would look like, and anything else you can think of. So I separated the kids up and put them in pairs, 2 and 3s. And, I had them discuss for about seven minutes. And so when we came back together as a whole group, the students asked me a question. They're like, well, Dr. Eakins, what do you think? And what would your ideal teacher look like? And it reminded me of a time growing up. I think I was in the 7th grade this year. Now, I grew up in a very religious home. And when it comes to religious homes, we didn't do a lot of the stuff that like a lot of the other families, especially a lot of the community members did. For example, we didn't trick or treat. Halloween wasn't something that we celebrated. And there was that belief that Halloween was bad, and all this different devil worshiping, all this stuff, right? So we just didn't do the trick or treating thing, that just wasn't part of what we did. And so I remember the 7th grade year, the teachers, like all the classes, all from the departments, the English teacher, the history. So it was towards the end of the, I don't know, semester year, somewhere around there, and it had to have been, I guess, around Halloween. But they decided they were going to show Casper the Friendly Ghost to all the 7th graders, and so we had to get a permission signed to come back to school and say yes. Parents said it's all good. We can watch this. So I take home my permission slip. My parents wouldn't sign it. They're like, no, we're not signing it. We're not going to have you. We're not going to support this watching the ghosts and all this stuff. Right? And so I went back to school the next day, and it was me and like two other students who also had some religious things that their parents didn't sign it either. I think actually, I think one of the kids just totally forgot to turn in their permission slip, so they just couldn't watch it either, right? And as a result, so we're in a room next door to the room where the auditorium where all the where they're watching the movie. And I sat there and we just sat there and looked at each other. Well, and we could hear the movie playing. We could hear the kids laughing and all the stuff. Looked like they were having a lot of fun, but we didn't feel included. Right now, going back to what my ideal teacher would have looked like and would have been like, it would have been nice had my if I I've had favorite teachers, and this is not the episode for that, right? But for me, if I could have an ideal teacher, that is something that I would want. Someone that recognizes, you know what, this student does not fit as far as morals, maybe, or beliefs or values, does not fit within the scope of everybody. So, yes, I want to create an event or have my students participate in something, but I recognize that this student or this group of students, this is not going to meet their needs. Is there something, maybe an alternative? Like, I mean, we legit sat in that room by ourselves talking to each other or just kind of just listening. We could hear the movie playing. There was no alternative thing. I think about the kids that, for example, that don't celebrate Christmas, that don't celebrate various group, activities, or they do celebrate activities that no one else celebrates within their class, and how isolated maybe they feel when they're eating maybe a certain meal or dish. They bring it home from their mom, and the mom spends their time, or their parents spend their time putting something together for food, and they bring it to school, and they get teased or made fun. Ugh, what are you eating? What is that? Having that teacher to provide that support for them, to comfort them with words of affirmations, uh, letting them know, listen, you know what? Don't listen to them. Don't worry about what they got to say. You know what? That food looks good. Can I try some? Oh, this tastes really good. But having a teacher in your corner when you don't fit the norm is so important. I can sit there and think about those times because of my beliefs and the way we were brought up. We were taught, you know what? There were school events that were happening on Saturday. But the way I was brought up, that was our Sabbath, right? And so I couldn't participate in certain events, sports, activities, things like that. While the majority of the class and the majority of students were able to participate in those events, I wasn't able to do so. But having that teacher to say, you know what, I'm really sorry that's not something that you're able to do. Here's an alternative, or just some words of encouragement. So that way I'm not feeling, or that student is not feeling as if they don't belong because they can't participate or do the things that everyone else is doing. And I didn't want special privileges, right? I didn't need to be brought up front. And so, hey, everyone, hey, gather around. We're going to other we're gonna other this student. Everybody gets to learn about this person's their special, something that's weird to you, but this is what they do on their own, right? So there's different ways, there's different strategies that we can connect, and just having those kind of idea experiences would make such a difference, right? Now, again, I'm one of those individuals that believes that teachers have the best intentions. Now, I did watch a few videos earlier this week on some stuff that some teachers are doing. It's just like, dude, it's 2023. Are you serious? Right now, this is what you're doing? And we had some conversation about that in my class. But at the same time, I think in general, a lot of us teachers, we get into the profession because we love kids, not trying to get rich, not trying to become millionaires. But we love students, we love kids. Maybe we have a craft, we have an expertise, we have the knowledge, or something that really drives us to do this work. Right? It's not I don't know. I think that's one of the reasons why a lot of us get into the profession, right? And so I believe that we often have the best intentions, but there's sometimes we miss things, and it's again not intentional, but those are the little things that when it comes to what an ideal teacher would look like, that is a piece that I want to have. And we'll talk about favorite teachers in just a moment, but I think that's really important. Well, let's move on. Talking about the teacher student bond. So another thing that I did this week was I asked my students, again, we're talking about teachers, and I had them reflect. I said, think back. Okay, I want you to think back to who your favorite teacher was and why. So I think this is so valuable because when we think about the teacher student bond, I think all of us has at least one teacher that we can think of off the top of our head. Oh yeah, such and such, Mr., Mrs., Doctor, whoever, right? We can think about all those different things if I was to ask you who your favorite teacher is or was. And there's always a why. Why were they your favorite teacher? Oh, well, this teacher, I can probably guarantee that that teacher knew your name and knew how to pronounce your name. That's probably one attribute. But for some people, that's not a big deal. Some people that is a big deal. You know, they gave me an Americanized nickname all year round, but this one teacher took the time to practice, say my name correctly. That really resonated with me. Or, you know what? I've been passed up first grade, second grade, third grade, fourth grade. Every year I got passed up. No one ever challenged me. Wasn't until ninth grade that someone actually gave me an F because English wasn't my first language, but everybody else just passed me along. Oh, yeah. Well, they're doing their best. English is just not their first language, so we'll just pass. So no one else challenged me except for this one teacher. Maybe some of us have a story like that. Some reason they're your favorite teacher. Some of the students said, so based off of the feedback that I got from my students this week, kind of boiled down to three different areas. One, students felt like, you know what, this is my favorite teacher because that teacher was more than just a teacher. Yes, we talk about reading, writing, and arithmetic. The value of academic support, the importance of getting those grades. Our educational system was built on results, right? Based off of the Industrial Revolution, and we still utilize that format to this day. But when we think about who our favorite teachers, the bond that we had with those teachers, they were more than just a teacher. How many of us have been dad, mom, counselor, nurse, social worker? Taught people how, man. I can tell you, I taught so many shoes. I taught so many people how to tie their shoes when I taught second grade that one year. Because that was just that was for every 5 minutes, kids were coming up to me, Mr. Eakins, can you tie my shoes? I taught kids how to ride bikes, how to fish. More than just a teacher. One of the things I have loved throughout my years in the classroom, throughout my years as an educator, is attending events outside of the classroom, going to powwows, going to basketball games, championships, soccer games, all those different things to see my students in their element outside of walk quietly, close their you got 5 minutes to get to class, turning your assignments, do your homework outside of that world, but seeing them within their own, like going to church events, watching my students perform their musical instruments and their band, watching them sing in front of an auditorium of thousands, 12 years old. I remember when I first started doing public speaking, keynotes. That was tough as an adult with 100 people in my audience and watching a kid, one of my students, sing their heart out in front of all these folks in their element. Being able to witness that means so much. Not only that, me personally, but the kids can really appreciate that their teacher took the time to come out and support them. The next one, making challenging subjects become easy. Now, I've mentioned before, I struggled in math. I took geometry twice in high school. Man, I still don't understand. You don't ask me no geometry questions. I can't help you. My daughter, she knows. My son as well. Look, man, I got y'all history, English. I got you. Ask me anything. We'll figure it out. But you start bringing you bring that math to me, right? But I can vividly think of several math teachers. Actually, two. Let me just say two, not several. Two math teachers that I had ninth grade that made math so like I don't know. It was like magical. It sung to me. There was a connection that, like, for someone who had struggled through math and struggled afterwards, I know it was the teachers. I know for sure it was the teachers that made math the way it was for me that year. So, not only was, of course, they obviously academics, but they're more than just teachers. And they're able to make challenging subjects become easy. The last one, let me bring this up so you can see this. The last one is these teachers are not afraid to do things differently. They challenge traditional styles of instruction and catered to individual needs first. Not the cookie cutter, not the one size fits all, but the teachers that take the time that says, you know what? I recognize that if maybe you need a little bit of extra time. Maybe let's go outside. Now, I went to a conference in San Diego earlier this year, back in March, Deeper Learning Conference. And I went to a session, and it was two indigenous session leaders, workshop host. And they said, we're going to do things differently. It's not a sit and get. This is not one of those sessions where, we're going to put you in small group. This is going to be different. We were in that room. We were in that space for like 5 minutes. And then they're like, all right, get your stuff. We're going outside. We went to an area within the park. And that was where we did our session. And it's very memorable for me because I experienced something outside of something I've never experienced in my life when it comes to a workshop presentation. And we talked about the value of utilizing nature in the classroom for instructional purposes, the value of understanding the earth and respecting the earth, and how it can relate to instructional practices that are outside of what the traditional instructional practices that we see a lot in our classrooms. Now, that might be an example that not everybody has maybe looked into, or it might take some practice. But even if we look at it, scale it down a little bit and look at it from a smaller standpoint, are there things that we can do that are outside the norm that doesn't fit? Again, going back to the crayons, doesn't fit within those lines. But these little things, characteristics, high quality teachers that make you memorable. I personally don't want to be one of those teachers, or didn't want to be one of those teachers. No one ever, oh yeah, I did have a history teacher one year. I don't remember. I don't know. Is there an impact that I can create that 20 years from now, 10 years from now, a student comes up to me, hey, Dr. Eakins, you remember me? You made such an impact in my life. Thank you for those times. Thank you for those conversations. Thank you for the stuff outside of the books, outside of my textbook. Thank you. Listen, me personally, I became a teacher because I had a history teacher, Mr. Fielder, dopest teacher I ever had. Man, I mean, this dude was just so cool. History teacher, and he taught basketball. He coached basketball. He was a basketball coach. I said, that's what I want to do. I became a history teacher and I coached basketball because that was the type of influence this man had on my life. The way, I mean, I wanted to be just like that when it comes to being a teacher. I wanted to model that. I had some very vivid memories. So again, none of these, well, I lied. I was going to say none of these have to do with academics, but the point is, teaching is not just bookwork. It's more than that, right? So when you think about, if you're watching this, you think about who your favorite teacher is, and why. What were those attributes that contributed to them being your favorite teacher? All right, let's wrap it up. Final thoughts. We have to keep in mind that our students, especially from the K-12, pre-K-12, I don't know, PK-15, I don't know. Nowadays, it seems like there's always another number. At the end of the day, our youth spend a lot of time with us. We're often viewed as caregivers to our students. We talked about last week the importance of those attachments and that what the research says about from early years through adulthood, how those attachments impact individuals. Where they were able to determine with a 77% accuracy whether or not a student was going to graduate from high school based off of the attachment that they had at the early age. As educators, I think it's very important that we do not look at relationships as a cliche term. Oh, yeah, we know. Yeah, we know about relationships important. No, they really are important. And not some surface level stuff, but really deep bonds. Kids will not want to let you down. Then we also have to remember those students that don't fit within the norm. Maybe they're pushing back because they don't accept the written and unwritten rules of what school is supposed to be like. We know all kids aren't we know all kids aren't the same. And the backgrounds, home in environments, situations, all these different things, the way that they interact, their social status, all those things impact how they show up to school. If we heat those hot coals, or if we provide those opportunities where we can give our own self-disclosure and we can be vulnerable. Say, listen, I get where you come from. I can identify with that. That's kind of how things were for me when I was your age. Or here's a situation for me. This is what would be an ideal teacher for me. Or we consider how those individual needs aren't going to always fit within the norms. And we say, you know what? I recognize that you might need a little extra time. Or maybe there's an alternative program or there's an alternative structure that I can provide. But we have to recognize those things. I have to be aware. Pay attention. Okay? That's all I got for you today. I'll be back next week for week 6. That's right. I said week 6. I can't believe, it was one of those things. It was just like, just see what happens. Week 2 came by, week 3, week 4, week 5 today. Next week, week 6 will happen. I'm looking forward to that. I don't have the topic yet, so that'll come. I know it's in my head, but I need to put it out, put it all together in my thoughts. But that will be coming soon, so I'll make that announcement soon. But in the meantime, I wish you all a great weekend. And remember the words of Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. If you can't fly, then run. If you can't run, then walk. If you can't walk, then crawl. But by all means, keep moving. Let's continue to be a voice in leading equity.